Kia ora, Alison Shaw, she has got a role that she holds in Rhema Media. It's the Executive Assistant of Broadcasting. A wonderful, wonderful lady who I don't know whether you've met or not, but she keeps us in check, as Bjorn has mentioned. But we got her in here because she is bona fide author.
Published author.
Look at you, published author. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Alison,
Thank you so much.
on the book. There's a dog in the garden journeying with Lewy Body Dementia, which is something very close and personal to you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so I wrote the book after journeying with my mum. It was about 7 years from onset to when she went to heaven, and during that time she was living with us. So it's very rare to see from onset to the whole spectrum of what happened. Normally family members just see a little bit here and there, a visit once a week or, once a fortnight, so they don't really get the full picture. So we saw it from the early signs, and the book is called There's a Dog in the Garden because that's what she saw. That was the first indication to us that something wasn't quite right.
And there was no dog in the garden?
No,
just
never
break
had a
it down.
dog,
Okay.
no.
So, I mean, a lot of people in New Zealand probably in their families or wider church families maybe, are connected to dementia in some way.
Yeah.
Lewy body dementia, could you expand on a little bit what's the difference or the terms?
So dementia is the overall umbrella, and there are lots of different types, but sort of the four most common, or the most common is Alzheimer's,
right,
which is your gradual decline in cognitive memory and that kind of thing, and that's just a slow decline. And then the second most common is vascular dementia, and that's normally following a stroke.
Right.
So there's been some element of a brain bleed. And then the third most common is Lewy body dementia, but probably the least known about or least understood. And that is Lewy body is abnormal protein deposits in the brain that interrupt normal brain function.
Wow.
So marked by hallucinations.
Okay. And things like that.
Yeah.
When I had a little bit of a read through of the book and just seeing some of the stories, and I'm sure these are maybe familiar, people listening might identify if you've been through this thing, but like the dog in the garden, that wasn't there. When those first start popping up and you noticed with your mum maybe things were a bit off or she's doing some things that are unexplainable, how long did it take before you realised something was quite amiss, more so than just, what are you doing? And you sort of brush those things off?
Oh, absolutely, because you don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
You're like, Mum, there's no dog in the garden, no,
Stop
there's
being
no
silly.
dog. Yeah, what are you saying? It's not right, And really, in hindsight, that's the most damaging thing to do, And the pivotal point for me was when I took her seriously, because that dog was real to her.
Yeah.
And so then I would open the door and get rid of the dog.
Physically do that?
Yeah, I'd stand in front of her, open the ranch slide and say, get out of here, like this, and close it and say, Mum, dog's gone now.
Because it's quite distressing, right? When if you're a person with dementia and that is your reality, that's what you're seeing and experiencing, and then have people around you just dismissing it and saying, that's not going on, what are you thinking? Yeah. That almost compounds it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't give them dignity. It confuses them even more. Well, am I right or am I right? Or because I believe my family, but what I'm seeing is real.
Yeah.
And so it actually causes a whole lot more stress, a whole lot more anxiety for them. And so when I actually said, it gives them dignity. I believe your mum, because it is real to you.
On the flip side, though, that would have been really, really hard for you as her daughter to be able to have engage in a conversation where you had to be on the other side. So is that, with dementia, there's no real cure. It's all part of the care, right?
Yeah, it's all about care.
So that was part of the caring for your mum?
Yeah.
What else did you have to do?
It's really, it's very traumatic.
Yeah, can imagine.
It's very painful because it's like a slow goodbye.
Yeah.
It's like this person's slipping through your fingers and you're desperate to keep them as who they were. So, there were a lot of situations that are extremely upsetting. And as the hallucinations, it progressed, the disease progressed, they got a lot darker.
Yeah.
The hallucinations were really dark. So there's a lot of, for caregivers, and if there's people listening today, make sure you look after yourself as well. It is a long goodbye. They call it ambiguous grief. So you are in a continual grief process.
Because you're losing more and more.
Yeah,
of
but
the
they're still
person.
there.
Yeah.
So, and I used to get upset if people say it's not really your mum, especially if it was things that were really upsetting. And I think that was probably the hardest seller, was when she turned on me one day,
Yeah.
and accused me to the caregiver, you know, because she had someone coming in to do personal cares.
Yeah.
And said in front of me, you know.
Wow.
You know, pointed her finger at me and said the things I was doing, how I was abusing her and all that. And you're like, I'm giving up my whole life to look after you.
I'm glad you actually
know?
said to look after yourself as well, because that's paramount as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what made you, I mean, it's kind of evident and obvious from here on the other side of you writing the book, but how far, when did you decide that you needed to do this, and what was the main reason?
I had no interest in writing a book, but the last care home that my mum was in was a specialist dementia, and they were amazing. They took each person as an individual because they understood, and it wasn't just dementia; it was mental health things as well. And they treated them as individuals. But she said to me when Mum passed away, she said, "You have to write a book." And I'm like, I'm not writing a book. And she said, you have to write a book because there's lots of clinical books, but there's not many people who have actually seen and experienced this journey, right, like I said before, from beginning to end. So, and then she said, what you write will be of huge benefit to other families. And that was the clincher.
Yeah.
I thought, if my experience can actually help somebody else, this is worth it. But then more than that, when we started to write, you know, I'd write a chapter each night and my husband Peter would come, we'd read it together, and then we'd just cry.
Yeah.
Is that
so
part
it was
of the healing?
cathartic.
You're sort of working
It
through
was healing,
it's
yeah.
therapy, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you chose to be her carer as well, right? And you said you were living sort of multi-generationally. For a lot of people, you know, in different stages of dementia, maybe they go into care. Do you think there's like a... I mean, my wife's nana had dementia, and we'd visit her, and she was in a dementia ward too. And we'd visit her, and you know, most of the time she didn't know who we were, she didn't remember us, but she'd always tell us these fantastical stories that were a mix of reality and the Mills and Boon books that she would read.
Yeah,
so there was
Mills and
these, tell us she'd run away with a stable boy the night before, and things would, you know. But she didn't know who I was. She never knew who I was, and that's really hard for people, right? And even just I'm not part of that family. I didn't know her growing up and stuff, but for people with, like you said, you're losing your mum. Is there temptation that it's too painful that they almost pull away?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's too much to go and visit.
And also, like for younger people like yourself, it's awkward. I don't know what to talk about. It's crazy, and like, how do you do this? You know, like it is. It's really confronting. But we'd always say it's how it made the person feel. The fact that she could have had an audience or had someone to talk to, that would have made her feel good, which is really important as well. But I think, and eventually we did, you know, Mum did have to go into care. But I remember driving away because, it's heart-wrenching. She would not want me to go, you know, and she'd pack her bag to come with me, you know, like this will make me teary. And that leaving, my goodness, that was so painful. And I'd cry my way down the street. But I remember being at a hairdresser and she said, oh, yeah, my mum was up there, or my family member was up there. And she said, I just gave up because I couldn't do it. And I thought, wow, I'm never going to do that. Yeah. Wow. Even if it means crying, I'm never going to stop, you know. But tough stuff.
There's some very dark moments that you have written throughout this book, Alison. There will be a treasure to anyone who's plugging it right now. There's a couple of questions I do want to finish on. In the back end, in chapter 11, you've got some common threads: sadness, resilience, and then you've got humour. So how did humour play a part in the care and you coping with things?
I think you're in a juxtaposition because some of the things they're doing are funny. You know, but you don't want to laugh at them.
Yeah, of course not.
But you've got to laugh about them. Like one of the early on ones that I did find extremely funny, but also it's extremely sad as well, was she was wiping the kitchen bench with a piece of toast.
But you have to laugh,
So
right?
you can see what I'm saying.
yeah.
And that was humorous, you know.
Yeah.
So for my own self-care,
Yes.
there had to be moments of humour.
Okay.
And right near the end, one of her great loves was pink lamingtons. It was a joy, you know.
Yeah.
And so that brought me a lot of, you know,
Aw.
I'd bring in a pink lamington, you know, soft and sweet. And
Beautiful.
And I
so
guess
there were moments,
there's
yeah.
things like that too of treasuring what's still there with the person, right? Those things that are consistent each time and you can connect through that. The book, if people do want to get a copy, there's a dog in the garden. The website, there's a dog in the garden.com.
It's just actually that's the website. Yeah, there's a dog in the garden.com, or you can email directly to doginthegardenlbd@gmail.com.
And have you had feedback from people who've read
Yeah.
the book?
Oh, heaps. Yeah, heaps.
I hope that
Heaps.
it gives you
Oh
strength.
yeah, you've told my story, or you've given me insight. A lot of the people you've helped me, especially that pivotal thing of going into their reality.
Yeah.
You've so helped me to do this, and you know, just the fact that someone understands, someo's been through it.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
Last one from me. Someone who's just beginning their journey with a loved one, who's going through a loved one who's got Lewy Body, dementia. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, that advice of go into their reality, and realise that that what they're seeing is really real, but also the self-care is really, really important. Through some of this time, I was going for counselling for myself just to offload, and that was really helpful. So I think that the danger is, because it can be hard saying goodbye or going out or whatever, you don't.
Yeah.
But you actually do need to have some boundaries there, painful as it is. But also for me as a Christian, you know, it was a real confronting to my faith. And there are some pivotal verses for me that carried me through as well. I think of that one when my heart was overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that's higher than I.
Oh.
And another one was when I felt she'd lost contact with God, and she's a really godly woman.
Yep.
And that really, I found that very, very hard. But then a friend said to me, nothing can separate you from the love of God, you know, not even dementia.
Yeah.
So verses were a real big part of my journeying through.
And your
And I think
healing.
that's the thing, stay in that place with God to get you through.